Welcome everyone to Visionality's Building Forward webinar series, where your friends Christiana Almeida and Emily Barony knock down nonprofit norms and burn it down and rebuild it better.
That was good. Today's topic is going to be shiny object syndrome, and AKA no, you can't have text to give until you do all these other things first. The reason we wanted to do this today was because we actually, as we were receiving feedback of like, hey, what other topics would you like to do? One of the pieces of feedback that we actually got back was like, hey, what are some creative fundraising ideas? I'm gonna wave to my neighbor. What are some creative fundraising ideas? And we're like, that's a really good topic for us to not do. From the standpoint of like, what are kind of the trends as it pertains to shiny object fundraising syndrome, but also like, what are the things that you as an organization need to have in place prior to even considering these? It's not to say that they're all bad. Some of them are bad, but it's not to say that they're all bad, but it's also not to say that all organizations are in a position to add these to their fundraising matrix to start with. So we need to start our timers. Mine is now going. Great. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and hop in. And why are we doing this? So this topic, we just gave a little bit of background, but really the kind of like core of this is that organizations sometimes get into panic mode when they're starting to see like donor year-over-year retention start to go down a little bit, or maybe their end of year like letter isn't performing as well as it used to. They start to panic a little and they're like, okay, so we need to just come up with something new. Like, how do we get new donors and new this and new that and redo all of it? And so they start to kind of look for these get rich quick schemes, and get rich quick schemes are very, common to just kind of like the American psyche in general, right? It's like, how do we work less to get more? It's not a bad concept in theory, but when it comes to like stretching your fundraising staff, but also stretching your resources thin, it actually can be an issue. And I'm going to have you comment on this while I mute because the street sweeper is going by. What a treat.
Well, and zero organizations that we've interacted with are like, our development team really has a lot of bandwidth. They just got time on their hands. So like, let's give them, they need things to do. Like zero organizations have extra bandwidth, especially in their development team. And I know it can be, we've all seen these like incredibly performing campaigns, and so I know that our staff and our board and our supporters are sometimes like, oh, try this. It worked for this one organization one time, like across the country. And so, yes, there are those like anomalies, but so often, but they don't work. Like 99% of the time they don't work. And so our big push is nail your basics and don't try anything sparkle, shiny, creative until you nail your basics, until you have great donor retention, until you're getting, your thank yous out right away. And we'll go through the list of like what those non-negotiable things are that you have to nail until you get to do text to give. But it's so much more costly to get a new donor than it is to retain an existing donor or work with that donor to create a pledge, to put you in their planned giving, so in their will or in their trust, or to increase their annual donation. So that's really what we're going to focus on instead of what's the new shiny thing, what's the new get rich quick scheme. So the first one, possibly my favorite one. Yes.
Yeah, keep going. I'm in.
Possibly my favorite one is Katy Perry. If we can just talk to Katy Perry, Christiana, if we could just talk to her, I know that she will love.
Moved to Santa Barbara, and I hear she and Prince Harry are loaded.
They're loaded.
And they're friends with Oprah, because we totally wanted to go after Oprah too. So if we can just get these people to just give us $1 million, it's fine.
Just one. We just need $1 million gift, and it's gonna be Katy Perry. I know it.
And the funny part is, like, we actually have seen a lot of organizations have this conversation as if accessing these people is just super easy.
And as if they don't know that they have lots of money that they can give away. Like, it's never occurred to them to like know about the organizations within their own passion delta and within like their community. Like they live under a rock and have no idea that they have money and that there are nonprofits who would like that money. So you're not going to get a gift from Katy Perry. You're not. Don't bother trying. It's not going to happen. Sorry. I know all of you on this call, and I love all of your missions. You all deserve her money. You're not going to get it.
Yeah, and I think that the important part here is that we actually, this happens very commonly, and this is not to bash board members like Paula, because it's not, but we do often hear this from a board down versus a staff up approach. Like these conversations do tend to come up within board meetings, like as they're looking at budgets. And I think it's really just like this opportunity to kind of look at who is already in your donor database that you have a relationship with. Who can you bump up to a higher giving level? Who haven't you reached out to? Like who hasn't seen a tour of like your facility or your mission in action? Those are really powerful opportunities to get existing donors more engaged with the mission and to get them to increase their giving over time as well. So yes, even though like we love the Katy Perry royalty Oprah approach, it's actually has never worked out in anyone's favor. And if anything, a cautionary tale with that is that if you do end up getting Oprah to go to your event, or if you do end up getting Oprah to give you money, there's actually a strong chance that's going to backfire, because then people are going to view your organization as not needing their support anymore. Like, oh, well, you have Oprah as a sponsor. Like you don't need my gift anymore because you have Oprah. And we actually have seen that happen with organizations who did try to go after and actually nail a large name like this. So cautionary tale, getting a big name actually is not necessarily going to help your organization, because it actually may deter people, because they're going to view your organization as fiscally just fine if you've got an Oprah in your back pocket. So
well, and we've seen that even like not with a famous person gift, but with a very large legacy gift. You know, there are a couple organizations locally who have gotten incredible legacy gifts, but a lot of times those have strings attached or they're restricted. And so yes, you may have a ginormous pot of money right here, but it's very likely actually that you don't have access to that for general operating, or it may have, restrictions could have been put in place that it needs to go into like the foundation and you can only pull off the interest. So it sounds really obviously like who wouldn't want a multi-million-dollar gift, but a lot of times like it's not just like a panacea and it ends all your problems.
Exactly. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Next one is going to be Text2Give.
Text2Give. I do love Text2Give. Text2Give is a great thing when you're ready for it. Most organizations haven't nailed the basics yet, so they're not ready for Text2Give, number one. Number two, the good Text2Give programs are expensive. So like on a Text2Give program, you don't want to cheap out. And so like some of the less expensive ones, for example, you text a number which just sends you to a website where you have to fill out your credit card information on your phone, and that sucks. So when you're ready for Text2Give, I do love it, and I'd like to hear your opinions on it. I personally love it. However, you have to spend the money. You can't cheap out on one of the like less integrated programs.
No, I definitely agree with that. And of course, like I'm coming to Text2Give from the standpoint that I used to work for the National American Red Cross, and we had the National American Red Cross was the original like to market for Text2Give. And so like we've seen the power of Text2Give. But also like if you have the traditional Text2Give where the phone company or like your carrier company is what's giving you the gift afterwards, they actually take a very high percentage. So you're getting like, so you need to be at a point where where a high volume is good, or you have the ability for a super high volume, because the overhead on it is really like hindering in so many ways. So I actually do prefer, if I was to do a Text2Give for smaller to medium-sized organizations, I actually do prefer the text with the link to the giving page, so long as your giving page is mobile friendly, just because the overhead on it is going to be a lot lower.
Got it.
and also you actually get to maintain the donor information if they're going to your website too. You do not get any donor information from that traditional style text to give. And that's a really important thing to note, because I'm a data nerd. And so I always believe having the information of who that donor is going to be far more valuable than the $10 to $15 donation. Also recognize that text to give tends to be very low dollar amounts. And so if you do not have a high volume opportunity, you're going to have low volume, low dollar amounts, because those tend to be like in the $20 range type gifts versus like online gifts tend to be in that $120 range. So just look at that difference there. So of sending somebody to your website versus asking them to text whatever number or text whatever word to whatever number.
I would also, so like, it also seems really most appropriate for like an impulse gift. So like, obviously, you know, disaster response and recovery is the exact example of an impulse gift. And so you're not going to build your monthly giving, you know, $100 a month pipeline through text to give. It can be really great for those like impulse, you know, impulse moments, but it's not going to be your ongoing, you know, sustainable, like keep the train on the tracks fundraising.
Yeah, and I really think that for most missions, it's not going to make sense. But like you said, that transactional, like hot in the moment, like stuff is like does make sense, and it would be used in only those instances. But honestly, like an animal shelter, like there's not going to be like much of that kind of like in the moment hot spot, like, oh my gosh, you need to respond now because we're you know, because of, you know, the wildfire that's taken out like 5,000 houses. Like you don't have that type of like instance. I would still be curious to see if there is an opportunity to see how text to give or just like a texting program can actually result in maybe kind of like ongoing stewardship of like story sharing or information sharing or usefulness sharing. So that's one of those things where it's like, I don't think it's completely useless and dead to me, but it's one of those things where I actually think I would be curious to see if there's an opportunity to be like, have a motivational Monday of like, or like if you are the animal shelter, like let's just send you a cute picture of a cat today because everybody loves pictures of cats in the middle of the day. No one's gonna lie.
I would 100% sign up for that. Could we please talk to our cat rescue friends and have them send me a text every day?
I think it's just one of those, like, can you be useful to your audience through a text to give program versus can you just ask your audience for money through a text to give program? But I'd be curious to see if there's an opportunity there. Yeah. Okay, let's go to like this one really kind of gets our goat. We're gonna go into GoFundMes. GoFundMes have always graded my cheese in the wrong way because they're often misguided. We often have these like, we as a society have like come into these like viral moments, right? Like where you see something go viral and we'll talk about viral campaigns as well. But you see something online and suddenly like so-and-so talked about it and so-and-so talked about it. And all of a sudden like this organization raised $200,000 on their GoFundMe. Oh my gosh, isn't that great? There's a lot of legal challenges with GoFundMe to start with. And then the second thing, you know, with GoFundMes is that you don't necessarily get, if you're not set up correctly, you actually have a tax liability to deal with. And so for instance, individuals that want to raise money and we actually do see this, we saw this during COVID, the beginning of COVID, where individuals were raising money to help like a group of students, you know, like get PPE or laptops or whatever it was. So it is good at heart, but for instance, if you end up raising $40,000, you are taxable, you're tax liable for $30,000 of that because you as an individual are allowed to receive $10,000 in cash gifts during the year. However, you are not allowed to receive more than that. And so there have been some instances where individuals have had immense tax bills because they did not set up their fundraiser correctly, and they did not set up their fundraiser as a 501c3. And now I'm going to hand it off to you, Emily, because I know that you got some big feelings on this too.
Well, and so what we've seen, you know, there is a ton of fraud in GoFundMes. And we see it so heavily in disaster response and recovery, which is terrible and awful and heartbreaking. But like, I don't trust a GoFundMe I don't donate to them. I never, number one. Number two,
I'm going to interrupt that one really quick though, because GoFundMe has started to put some things in place that if you are a certified nonprofit, if you do have a 501c3, they will now put a little badge on your GoFundMe page that you are a certified nonprofit and have gone through the certification process at least. So I'll at least give you that one.
So here's my question though. If I am a certified nonprofit, why would I choose to do a GoFundMe over a different kind of micro giving campaign that goes through my own like database and merchant account? Why would I choose that? I don't know.
Because you may not have set up your merchant account yet.
Okay, fair enough. So if you're an individual and you set it up and you actually raise real money, which is the goal of your GoFundMe, is to raise real money, you have a tax liability, you as an individual human being. And if you said in your description, 100% of this goes to whoever the beneficiary is, you can't go back and take those taxes out. You're not allowed to. So now you're in this position. Let's say it went fabulously well and you raised $200,000. It's happened. Now you're in this position of either giving back $200,000, which is terrible, or paying taxes on $190,000 of donations. And so it's really painful. And you know, in those instances, I know it's coming from a good place, but so it's just so sad because people are trying to do the right thing and trying to make a difference, but just by not knowing the nuances of what they're doing, they're actually causing more harm than good.
And I think this also just goes back to what we were just talking about with Text2Give in terms of, we got 10 minutes left. This goes back to the concept that we were just talking about with Text2Give of like, it's that really fast kind of like, it like knee-jerk reaction giving, right? And so this is another type of knee-jerk reaction like setup as well. And so having, and it goes back to, again, having systems in place, like having a merchant account set up, having, you know, your donor database set up, having a way to take donations as a young nonprofit, or having a fiscal sponsor if you do not have a 501c3 yet. So I think that's just really important to like check those boxes, because jumping out ahead of yourself is like a really hard thing to do. And even like the Save the San Marcos Foothills campaign here, as soon as they got rolling, they got a fiscal sponsor because they knew they were going to need a fiscal sponsor in order to raise the 18.6 million that they did. So it wasn't the like, oh, it's grassroots, it's really successful when it's grassroots. Like even grassroots organizations like need a fiscal sponsor or a form of that kind of like fiscal checkpoint to, because it protects you in the long, it protects you as the individual in the long run too.
So let's talk about fiscal sponsorships. So never, not once, not a single dang time in my entire career have I been able to talk someone out of starting a nonprofit. Never, not once. And what I tell people is don't file your C3 until you've raised $200,000. That's a lot of zeros, 200,000. An average fiscal sponsorship will take 10% of your donations. We, in a former life, ran micro nonprofits. So we were the only staff for all volunteer organizations. Don't do it anymore. Used to do it. We couldn't run even the smallest organization for less than 20,000. Math is hard. 10% of 200,000 is 20,000. Until you raise 200,000, don't file your C3. Go under a fiscal sponsorship. Now, if our fourth shiny object that we hate is a Facebook fundraiser, and you cannot set up a Facebook fundraiser if you don't have your own independent C3. So the siren song of the Facebook fundraiser is, oh, it's for grassroots, it's for super tiny, scrappy organizations, but you shouldn't have your C3 until you've raised $200,000 based on my not humble opinion. So don't do a Facebook fundraiser.
Based on my not humble opinion. Way to own that. The reason I don't like Facebook fundraisers is, again, data. You do not get the data information of any money raised on the platform, and that drives me bananas. Because again, like so for instance, let's say you get like 100 donors that give through Facebook. That's 100 individuals that you do not get information for, and that to me is like really a loss. Like that to me is like almost like a fiscal liability that you have 100 people giving to your organization that you have no way to follow up with. You have no way to connect them to your mission. You have no way to just actually like follow up with them. And so like, it's, to me, it's a huge fiscal loss in the long run, because yeah, you get the $10,000, but at the end of the day, like how much is it costing you, or what's the opportunity cost for getting that? Bernardo, yes, they are shiny objects to avoid. But they're also very common too, and that's the hard part. Just to kind of give like a quick little backstory or a funny story, I was on LinkedIn the other day, and I saw that Facebook was actually hiring for a project manager to oversee basically this program. And I'm sitting there going like, man, that would be a fun program to burn down, because they were also talking about Must Love Giving Tuesday, and I'm like, oh girl, no, about that. Because Facebook fundraising is hard from this. It's just like the return on investment isn't there. You don't get the donor information. You don't even get to like even know easily who all is fundraising for you. So you don't even know who your biggest like digital supporters are. So it's one of those things where it's like have the button there if you want it, but it's also be like, don't put the work into it, because it's a lot of work for not a lot of return on investment. And in the long run, you're not going to get that donor information. And then you get the new donors, but then they're gone the next year. And that to us is the like really focusing on keeping donors year over year. Okay, girl, we got 5 minutes.
Quickly.
You want to just go into things that you do need to do?
No, very quickly. Goodness gracious, do not do an ice bucket challenge. Goodness gracious. It has nothing to do with your mission. Why are you doing this? Cold water sucks. Like, I don't like, and you can't make something go viral. Like, just don't do it. Okay, we're moving on. Just don't do it. So Christiana, what are the 5 things that organizations need to do before they get that siren song Text2Give?
So I really think looking at what your year over year retention rate is really important. So how many donors, like what percentage of your donor database is giving to you 3 years in a row? I think that's a huge number to look at, and it's very trackable if you have a good database, but also make sure your database is cleaned up prior to this. Because if you are doing a really good job of keeping your donors engaged year over year, that means that you are doing a really good job of the basics of making sure that you're communicating, making sure that you're having a compelling ask, and that you're keeping them engaged, throughout the year, so they don't just feel like you're hitting them up at the end of the year. So I would say like if your 3-year rolling average is like 35% of donors staying on, that feels like a very low threshold, but more than 2/3 on an average basis of new donors never give again. So if you're doing 35% like recurring, you're doing excellent. So I would say look at that first, because it means that you actually are doing a good job of keeping your donor database engaged. Also with that, with that means that you're doing all your basics correctly. Like you're thanking them in a proper time, after they give the gift. You are stewarding them afterwards. They're feeling engaged. They don't just feel like it just doesn't feel like a transactional relationship. So it feels like an ongoing relationship.
So number 1 is achieving at least 35% of a rolling average 3-year donor retention. Yes. Thing number 2, my pet peeve, is getting your thank you and receipt and acknowledgement out within 48 business hours. And I don't just mean that auto-generated from your merchant account. I mean a real meaningful thank you, even for a small gift. And it can be a super quick phone call. It can be a handwritten email, like a personalized email, a handwritten note from a board member. We're moving a lot of our clients onto a program called ThankView, which is a really easy program to deliver personalized video messages, and it makes it super easy to record it and deliver it. Thing number 3, because we got to keep it moving. You need to have a clean, usable database with at least 2 people in your organization who know how to use it. This is terrible. We see huge turnover in the development role. So we see so many organizations where one magic person knows how to use the database, and then they move on to a different organization and everything's ruined. So clean, usable database and 2 staff people who know how to use it. Number 4.
An annual giving program that you actually use. So an annual giving program is basically like a working living document that has an annual communications and development program. And I always think that communications and fundraising need to go hand in hand. They should not be separated. But how are you communicating with your donors? How are you communicating with your external supporters? How are you communicating with your advocates? What is your ask cycle? And it doesn't have to be just like your mid-year letter and your end-of-year letter, because that is really boring and outdated. But what are you doing to make little asks throughout the year? What are you doing to kind of like have different opportunities for giving for different programs? And then also like just having that rolling on an annual basis, so you can actually have a prediction of what each of those asks is going to generate as well. So we recommend around like 4 to 5 of like asks a year, 1 to 2 of them being major, but also just making sure that you have opportunities throughout the year to be highlighting the work that your organization's doing. And even if it's a small like fundraising goal of like $10,000, like you're still like getting that opportunity to get people engaged. But also, again, that communications aspect of the annual giving program is going to be your most important part of it.
Here is, I think, possibly the most important and easiest lift, especially for small organizations. Our 5th thing that you must do before you get Text2Give is achieving 100% board giving. Now that's kind of accepted now that we need 100% board giving, and we're up leveling that to say 100% board volunteerism. Now, I don't care what the amount is. It should be a meaningful gift to each individual board member. I have seen organizations where a $10
Oh, there it is.
Where a $10 gift is a meaningful gift for a board member, and that's fine. I don't care what that number is. It just needs to be meaningful to you. I've heard organizations who say, if you're on our board, we expect to be in your top 3 gifts annually. That seems reasonable to me. My time is worth a lot more than my money. So like that seems reasonable. But the other thing that I think is so important is 100% volunteerism on your board. There are lots of boards in our community that are super cool. Like
they don't touch it.
Well, and it's like cool to be on their board. It's like a status. Oh, I'm on this board. So lucky for those organizations, but like, especially when it's like a super cool organization, people are on the board for a status symbol, not because they actually care about the mission, vision, values. And you can tell if people care if they show up with their most precious resource, which is their time.
Absolutely agree.
Have we done it?
I think we did it. We did 26 minutes this time. So, we were a little over, but I'll give it to us because we were fighting the street sweeper who was literally going back and forth in front of my house multiple times. And I was like, What are you doing today? If anybody has questions, like go ahead and drop them in the chat, or like feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. Like that's totally cool too. But this is one of those things where it's like, oh, we need some creative fundraising ideas. And it's like, do we need creative fundraising ideas?
No, you don't.
Or do we need to do the basics really well? And I know that it seems like as a consulting company, it seems really boring.
It is
like for us to talk about the basics so often.
I have a quick clarifying question.
Yeah. Hi, Fran.
First of all, hi, Emily.
Hi.
And I am going to go back and watch the replays. I've missed too many of these. Clarifying question. How many asks per year did you say? I thought I heard 5.
I like 4 to 5.
Okay, and 1 or 2 would be major, but quick examples of how the lesser asks would look like.
Yeah, and so one of the organizations that we're working with this year, we actually did a Amazon Smile ask, as weird as that sounds, because they actually have a very specific like material need list. So we helped them develop an Amazon wish list. That's what it was. So we helped them develop their Amazon wish list for supply, like for actual
like we're seeing for teachers now when school's starting, right?
Exactly. And so that was one campaign that we did. So we also had a fiscal ask with that as well. Of like you can go through our wish list, or you can donate here. So that was 2 avenues for giving for that had nothing to do with like a mid or an end year as well. We also have an organization that has like what was the word I'm looking for? They actually are going to be doing a new executive director announcement. And so we're actually going to be doing a small fundraising campaign around that as well. And so they're more like soft asks versus like the 2 major hard asks, but are there opportunities to create soft asks as well? And we also put a soft ask within our annual reports as well. And we've been doing more digital reports, digital annual reports, and digital annual report delivery, and creating the opportunity to give or to highlight, you know, as we're highlighting the story of the organization, making sure that there's the opportunity to give alongside that as well.
Well, and one fun thing to do when you're doing an annual report is as you're creating it, you show your donors the way that they will show up in your annual report. And you can say, you know, we need to make sure that your name is spelled properly. You know, if you're a partnered up couple, do you want both names? Do you want the family? Like how, so it's like, hey, Christiana, this is how you're going to look in our annual report. But what actually happens is people know what giving level they want to show up as. So you'll
If
get
they want
that
the inside
question.
cover for their photo, you donate
You'll
this
get
amount.
that question. Oh, what will it take to move me to the next level? And so that can be like, again, like a soft ask. It's not even an ask. It's just showing them, it's actually stewardship, showing them how they're going to show up. But then subconsciously they're like, wait, am I close to the next level? And then you can get a little micro gift. Christiana, what do you think about like a programmatic shortfall ask? Like, you know, we, you know, we're doing all kids get backpacks. I don't know. And we're, you know, we've got 10,000 left that we need to raise in order to get every kid a backpack, whatever that is. How do you, is there a benefit or a drawback to being public about possible funding programmatic shortfalls as a tool to get an ask? What do you think?
I wouldn't say it's a tool that you should use often, because it shouldn't be a tool. But I think if you do have programmatic shortfalls, I don't think it's, I think organizations tend to want to be very coy about whether or not they're actually, you know, have a fiscal issue. I think in this day and age though, like things are just like, things are so unpredictable right now that no organization can possibly fully understand like what its operational or fiscal needs are until it sees something like that. And so I think if you do have an operational shortfall, there's nothing wrong with asking for that money or creating a micro campaign around it. Where I actually literally got an email this morning from one of our clients saying that they just found a $14,000 hole and that we're going to help fill. But that's an easy thing to do though, right? Like $14,000 is very easy to raise from that standpoint. And it's very specific, it's timely, and it's short. And so those are kind of like key components to a good campaign anyways, but when your entire program hinges on that, it's not good. But for instance, like this organization has seen like a 200% increase in use of their services. So of course there's going to be a shortfall compared to what they had predicted. Like, you know, even if they had predicted like last, you know, 2 years ago or on a 5-year plan, like, of course it's going to be like massively different because COVID made everything massively different. Like, so I don't think it's bad at all but when it is your primary fundraising tool, then it's bad.
Then it's bad. So only if it's actually true, only if it's an achievable amount. So you probably don't want to come out and say, whoops, we got $1 million shortfall to fund our primary program. Probably not a good look. So only if it's true, it's an achievable amount, it's timely, it's specific, you know, all those things.
Yeah.
Got it. What other questions do we have, my friends? I think we've done it.
Easy.
I've got just a little comment.
Yeah.
As a board member, you know, we also know that we need to donate, and our development department has, you know, really stressed that it's really important on grants that they are able to honestly say that we have the 100%, you know, giving and all that. But I do a recurring monthly gift, you know, like annual gift, you know, recurring gift. But I know I'm going to be getting those other asks in between.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of gauge, okay, this is my minimum, but I know it's not my maximum. So I've got, you know, room to give, you know, depending on what they are. And we have a lot of special, you know, like education. So every new site has a new education center in it. And we recently did a rehab to home to house 7 homeless women, you know, like the higher risk type thing. So they did a soft ask for that because they needed to totally, you know, decorate the house and linens and, you know, all the stuff that you need to put a home together, and, you know, which was a really fun thing to do. And so even though I know that I would honestly give to that. I know there was a lot of other people that normally give that was like, oh yeah, I can give to that in addition. So
Christiana, what do you think about, exactly this situation where like you're a board member, you're actively invested in the day-to-day operations of an organization. Do you think we should adjust? I don't know how to word this properly. Like, I think personally, I would rather have my board members give monthly at that max level and ignore the special asks unless they're very, very like moved or meaningful. But what do you think about that? I don't know this answer.
I actually don't know if there is an answer for it. I think that, at the end of the day, like if you feel like you're giving a reasonable amount on that monthly basis and you have capacity and desire to like based on something that comes up, I think that's totally fine. But I also don't think that like we need to pigeonhole our board members into having one style of giving or another.
Yeah.
Because again, there might be another organization that is important to them that they want flexibility for. And I think that like allowing for flexible philanthropy to me is really important, because then if people do feel like they have control, they feel like they can feel good about themselves. And if we do get those opportunities where it is kind of that like, that short specific, like even if it's, they then have capacity to give like $100 or $150, I think that's great. And so allow your own personal philanthropy to remain flexible. Like for instance, like our own philanthropy, like in our household, remains fairly flexible. We have our organizations that we give to every single year, but then there's also those organizations that like based on the work that they're doing, based on like the world that we're living in, they might get a gift that that we may not have otherwise given. And so, but it's just one of those things of like, it gives you an opportunity to acknowledge the work that is happening in your community, that you want, to kind of give a little kudos for, but also still that investment style of making sure that you are maintaining that ongoing relationship with the organization too. So, and actually, Emily, something that you had mentioned as it pertained to board giving and board volunteer time, organizations or funders are, and I had this at the organization that I'm on the board of, they're really asking the diversity question too. And this was a very interesting experience for the board that I serve on, because the board was basically asked point blank, what are you doing to diversify your board? What is your plan? And I really appreciated that question, because I felt like it was kind of a question that our board had been slightly kicking around a little bit versus like really digging into. But I really appreciated that a funder asked point blank, like, because they looked at our board list. We had to list, kind of, everybody's identity on it. And then they just asked point blank, what are you doing to fix this? Because this is not a diverse board. And so there is an appreciation that like funders do actually look at this stuff. They do look at your board giving. They do look at board volunteer time. They do look at board diversity. And so your board really is kind of like your first point of entry, as it pertains to funders, as well as like volunteer hours too. So making sure that you have like people who are engaging with your organization in that really kind of different non-fiscal way as well. And making sure that you keep the doors open when possible.
Speaking to board diversity, that for me is the primary reason why I don't recommend a give or get program. So what that looks like is if you sit on a board, they set that annual amount that you must give personally, or you must like get from the people within your network or your business or your employer or whatever. And so, I personally have sat on boards with a big give or get, and, sitting alongside people with a significantly higher net worth than mine, which made a very unequal lift for us. And made me feel like trash a lot of the time, because I wasn't doing, I couldn't just, write that $5,000 check without thinking about it. I also don't have an employer who can just write that $5,000 check without thinking about it. And so I really don't recommend a give or get. I know it sounds good to have some expectations around what your board members bring in. However, I prefer the language of, we need 100% board giving at a level that is personally meaningful to you. And like I said before, I love that framing of, we would like to be in your top 3 gifts. That seems to make perfect sense. And if that's $100 a year, awesome. That's great. That's so great.
Okay.
Can I
Oh,
jump
Sally's
in?
got a question.
Yeah, well,
ahead, Sally.
I don't have a question. I do have a comment. But after all of this time with COVID, there's so much fatigue on staff, on boards, even on missions. But the kind of very direct information you're doing in these programs is great, because I suspect that boards at this point are wanting to jump at one of these shiny things because they can't do what they've been doing. They can't do it the same way. And oh goodness, let's do something. So thank you for getting it out there and do it more.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that nice compliment. Yeah, I think as it pertains to like staff and board fatigue, like you really nailed that on the head. Like it's the people are, we haven't been able to function the way that we normally function for a year and a half now, and that has been very unsettling for boards. It's been very unsettling for staff. And I think that like the thing that Emily and I are really just trying to drive home is like, if you just keep like digging in and doing the basics, like it will work. It takes time. But even the number of organizations that we've talked to who weren't like engaging much in their engagement and communications plan before, you suddenly lose your ability to connect with people in person. They've had to actually focus on getting newsletters out, getting donor communications out, doing those phone calls, like finally doing those things that they should have been doing for years.
Yep.
So if anything, it's actually forced organizations to finally look at the basics, as boring as they are, but they are really good. Like those donor calls from board members are really good. They're really powerful things. But another item on staff fatigue, and this is like a massive tangent, and then I promise we'll wrap up. We have done a couple of board retreats recently, and those have been really fascinating to hear from staff during those board retreats, just how completely fried they are.
Yeah.
Staff has gone through an incredible trauma over the past year, especially those organizations that have had a requirement to be in person in the office in order to execute their mission. So if you're a board member, I would highly recommend that you take a moment or in one of your upcoming meetings to figure out how you can acknowledge and thank your staff members in a nice, meaningful way, because especially if they've had to show up like physically to work every single day, that just the concept of the uncertainty of everything, no one's been able to plan more than a couple of weeks in advance. Like, so everything's been so up in the air, and they keep showing up day after day to execute your mission. And so if you have an opportunity as a board, it can be something as silly as a pizza party, or just like, again, handwritten thank you notes or whatever it is, but think of a way that as a board member that you can acknowledge and thank your staff for the work that they've really put in this past year, because they're the reason why your organization's still afloat and your organization's still running. And having done that, they've also had to go through like a fair amount of professional trauma in order to do that as well. And so,
and professional trauma that trickles into personal trauma. If you are working for an organization that is frontline, you had to show up every single day, which is possibly putting yourself at risk, but now that trickles into your family. Number one, if you have kids who were homeschooling, but you had to physically show up to your job, like that's additional like personal stress. And one thing that we had to really come to terms with within our organization was checking our privilege, because we did not need to show up in person. We have the extreme privilege of being able to sit behind our computers for the last 18 months and not within our professional world, not put our personal safety or our family's safety on the line. And that is not true for so many people in our community. And for a lot of our nonprofit employees, they have had to physically put themselves on the line to continue the mission. And I would imagine that that's not necessarily true for a lot of board members who had that privilege like we had of being able to stay home. And so we're just, acknowledging that. I'm grateful for that. I'm glad that we could do that, but it is a piece of privilege that a lot of our employees didn't have, and they're fried. And they're tired, so buy them some pizza.
Yeah, and I think it's just that acknowledgement of what the past year and a half has been. Just taking that extra step is going to go a long way to build your employee morale too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have taken up so much of your time today. We are so sorry, but thank you so much for hanging in with us for a full 50 minutes on a 25-minute presentation. Thank you guys so much for your time, effort, and energy this morning. It has been an absolute pleasure to kind of chat with you today and actually have a slightly more, a more fun, interactive opportunity to talk with you. We will be back on in 2 weeks. The recording for this will be up and live in the next couple of days here. Feel free to send it to any of your board member colleagues or staff members, or go view any of our old ones too. Emily and I are here available as well. If you have any questions whatsoever or ideas for other upcoming Building Forward series topics, we think we're just going to keep rolling with this. We thought this was only going to be 6 parts, but we think we're just rolling with it at this point. Send us ideas of things you want to tackle, or things that we will anti-tackle, similar to what we just did today. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for your time, effort, and energy. We all hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Happy September on this September 1st. And I can't believe we are most of the way through the year. So thanks,
Yep.
friends.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.